A renowned surgeon finds a bleeding stranger collapsed at his clinic door at midnight. She opens her eyes, looks directly at him, and whispers, "You promised you'd wait for me, Daniel." He's certain he's never seen this woman before in his life. What she shows him next shatters everything he thought he knew about himself. The autumn rain fell in sheets against the windows of the Riverside Medical Center, each drop striking the glass like an accusation Daniel couldn't answer. He didn't particularly care for storms. They reminded him of things he preferred not to remember, though lately he couldn't quite recall what those things were. It was approaching midnight on a Thursday, and the clinic stood empty except for Daniel Cross, 36 years old, chief of neurosurgery, working late because going home to his sterile penthouse felt more exhausting than staying. The surgical reports blurred together on his screen. Success rates, patient outcomes, all favorable. His life distilled into metrics and percentages. A crash from the entrance shattered his concentration. Not the sound of breaking glass, but something heavier, a body hitting a door. Daniel stood immediately, his surgeon's instincts overriding caution. The clinic had been locked an hour ago. No one should be trying to get in. He crossed the darkened waiting room and saw her through the glass door. A woman, maybe 30, collapsed against the entrance, one hand pressed against her side, the other reaching toward the handle. Even in the dim security lighting, he could see the blood seeping between her fingers. Daniel unlocked the door and caught her as she fell forward. She was lighter than he expected, shivering violently despite the jacket soaked through with rain and something darker. "I need help," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I've got you," Daniel said, shifting into the calm authority that had guided him through countless emergencies. He half carried her to the nearest examination room, his mind already cataloging symptoms: pale complexion, rapid breathing, significant blood loss, possible internal injuries. He laid her on the table and reached for the emergency kit, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "What happened? Were you attacked?" The woman's eyes focused on his face with an intensity that made him pause. They were gray. He noticed the color of winter storms. "You don't recognize me," she said. Not a question, but a statement heavy with something Daniel couldn't name. "Should I?" He cut away her jacket, exposing a deep laceration along her rib cage. Not life-threatening if treated quickly, but serious enough. "We need to stop this bleeding." "How did this happen?" "Car accident," she said, wincing as he applied pressure to the wound. "On Route 7, about 10 miles out. The guardrail." "I remembered this place was close, that you'd be here." "You remembered I'd be here." Daniel frowned, reaching for gauze. "At midnight." She gave a small, pained laugh. "You're always here at midnight. Working late because you can't sleep. Black coffee, no sugar." Same routine for years. The specificity of her knowledge sent a chill down Daniel's spine that had nothing to do with the storm. "Who are you?" "My name is Sophia." She watched him with those storm-colored eyes. "Sophia Bennett, and you promised me something once." "Daniel, you promised you'd wait for me, no matter how long it took." Daniel's hands stilled. The name meant nothing to him. The face, striking despite her pallor, triggered no recognition. Yet something in the way she said his name, familiar and wounded, made his chest tighten. "I think you have me confused with someone else," he said carefully, resuming his work on her wound. "I've never made a promise like that to anyone." "Yes, you have." Sophia reached into a jacket pocket with her free hand, pulling out something small and metallic. She pressed it into his palm, her fingers scalded against his skin. "You gave me this 5 years ago." "The night before you forgot me?" Daniel looked down. It was a medical ID bracelet, simple steel with an inscription. The engraving caught the light as he turned it. Asterisk to Sophia, my constant. Always. Daniel. Dot asterisk, his own handwriting. He'd recognize it anywhere. The slight backward slant of the letters, the way he crossed his T's. But he had no memory of writing these words. of buying this bracelet, of knowing anyone named Sophia. This isn't possible, he said quietly. 5 years ago, Sophia continued, her voice growing weaker, you were in an accident, a surgical conference in Chicago. The taxi you were riding in was hit by a drunk driver. You suffered severe head trauma. Daniel's hands moved mechanically, cleaning and dressing her wound, while his mind raced. He did remember an accident 5 years ago, 3 weeks in the hospital. Headaches that lasted months, but the details were fuzzy, filtered through a haze he'd attributed to the trauma itself. The doctors said you'd make a full recovery, Sophia went on, but there was damage. Retrograde amnesia. You lost approximately 80 months of memories. 18 months. That included meeting me, falling in love with me, and planning a future together. Daniel finished securing the bandage and stepped back, the bracelet still in his hand. If what you're saying is true, why didn't you come find me? Why disappear for 5 years? I tried. Sophia's eyes filled with something that looked like old grief. I came to the hospital every day. But your family, they had other plans. Your brother, specifically Marcus Cross. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. His older brother, the one who'd helped him through recovery, who'd guided him back to work, who'd stood by him when everything felt uncertain. Marcus told me you needed a fresh start. Sophia continued that the relationship we had was causing you confusion and stress, that it would be better for your recovery if I stayed away. He showed me reports from your neurologist, consent forms you'd allegedly signed. I believed him because I loved you enough to want what was best for you, even if it meant losing you. That doesn't explain 5 years of silence, Daniel said, though his certainty was cracking. It doesn't. Sophia shifted on the examination table, color slowly returning to her face as the immediate danger passed. I tried to move on. I really did. But 3 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. Something that explains why Marcus was so determined to keep us apart. She pulled a folded envelope from her inner pocket, the paper worn from repeated handling. This arrived at my old address. The landlord forwarded it. It's from a law firm in Portland, dated 2 weeks before your accident. Daniel took the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was a single document, legal and formal, a trust fund establishment form. The beneficiary name made his breath catch. Asterisk, Sophia Bennett Cross. Asterisk, we got married, Sophia said softly. 6 weeks before your accident. It was a small ceremony, just us and a handful of friends. We were planning to tell your family after you got back from Chicago. You wanted to handle it carefully because you knew Marcus would disapprove of you marrying a public school teacher instead of someone from your social circle. Daniel stared at the document. His signature at the bottom, authenticated and notarized. A trust fund of $3 million, established in Sophia's name, with access to begin on their first anniversary. The date listed was 2 weeks away when the document was created, right before the accident that erased her from his memory. Marcus knew, Daniel said, the pieces falling into horrible place. He found out somehow about the marriage, about this trust, and realized that if you never remembered me, Sophia finished, I'd never claim it. The money would revert to the family estate after 7 years. He just had to keep us apart long enough. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the clinic's foundation. Daniel looked at the woman before him, this stranger who claimed to be his wife, who held proof of a life he couldn't remember living. The bracelet in his hand felt impossibly heavy. Why now? He asked. Why tonight? After all this time? Sophia's expression darkened. Because Marcus found out I had the trust documents. Someone broke into my apartment last week, ransacked everything, clearly searching for something specific. I've been running ever since. Tonight's accident wasn't really an accident, Daniel. I was forced off the road. The implication hung between them like the storm outside. Marcus, his brother, the person he trusted most, potentially trying to harm this woman to protect his deception. I need you to believe me, Sophia said, reaching for his hand. I know, It sounds insane. I know you have no reason to trust me. But that bracelet, that document, they're just pieces. The real proof is in the things no one else could know about you. Like what? Daniel challenged, though part of him was afraid of her answer. Like the scar on your left shoulder blade from when you fell off a bike at 14, Sophia said. Your brother told everyone you got it playing football. But the truth is, you were trying to impress a girl who never noticed you anyway. You told me that story late one night when we couldn't sleep. Daniel unconsciously touched his shoulder. He'd forgotten the real origin of that scar himself. The story simplified over years of retelling, like how you play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No. To when you're upset, Sophia continued, but only the second movement. And you always stop at the same measure, because that's as far as your mother taught you before she died. Like how you take your coffee black, not because you prefer it, but because you learned to drink it that way during residency when there was never time to add anything, and now anything else tastes wrong. Each detail landed with precision, intimate knowledge only someone close to him would possess. Daniel felt his carefully constructed reality beginning to fracture. You're left-handed naturally, Sophia went on, her voice growing stronger, but you taught yourself to be ambidextrous for surgery. You have nightmares about losing a patient on the table, the same patient, and you wake up at exactly 3:14 every time. You donate anonymously to 3 different children's hospitals, but never attend their fundraisers, because you don't like being thanked for doing what should be basic human decency. Stop, Daniel said quietly. Then, louder, stop! Sophia fell silent. The rain continued its assault on the windows. Daniel turned away, his mind reeling. Everything she'd said was true. Things he'd never told anyone. Private details of his life he barely acknowledged himself. The nightmares? He asked. His back still turned. Did I tell you about the patient? Her name was Emma Rodriguez, Sophia said gently. She was 7 years old. Cerebral aneurysm. You were still a resident. The surgery went perfectly, but she had an unexpected stroke in recovery. You were there when she died, holding her hand because her parents were stuck in traffic. You blamed yourself for months, even though you're attending, and every colleague told you there was nothing you could have done differently. Daniel closed his eyes. Emma Rodriguez. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in over a decade. The guilt had faded to a dull, constant ache he'd learned to carry. But he'd never shared the story. Not with friends, not with colleagues, not with a therapist his residency program mandated. He turned back to Sophia. If we were married, where's your ring? She held up her left hand. A thin white line circled her ring finger. The skin there slightly paler than the rest. I wore it every day for 4 years. I only took it off 6 months ago when I finally accepted you were never coming back. I sold it last month when I needed money to keep moving. Her voice cracked slightly. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Daniel pulled a stool close and sat facing her, studying her features in the harsh fluorescent light. Her face held no deception, only exhaustion and a desperate kind of hope. Tell me something only my wife would know. Something impossible for anyone else to learn. Sophia met his gaze steadily. 3 weeks before your accident, we found out I was pregnant. We hadn't told anyone yet. We wanted to wait until after the first trimester. You were terrified and thrilled in equal measure. You started reading parenting books immediately, making lists of names, designing a nursery in your head. The words hit Daniel like a surgeon's blade, precise and devastating. A baby, he whispered. I miscarried 4 weeks after your accident, Sophia said, tears finally spilling over. The stress, the grief of losing you. It was too much. I was alone in an emergency room in a different city, and the man who should have been holding my hand didn't even remember my name. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. A grief for a child he'd never known existed, for a wife he couldn't remember loving, for a life that had been stolen from both of them. Sophia, he said, testing how her name felt in his mouth. It didn't trigger memories, but it resonated somehow. like a song he'd once known well, but hadn't heard in years. If everything you're saying is true, if Marcus really did this, we need proof. Real proof, not just documents and stories. I know. She wiped her eyes. That's why I came here tonight, even though it was dangerous, because you're the only person who can help me get it. Marcus kept files. Daniel, everything he did to keep us apart, every manipulation, every forged document, he kept it all as insurance in case I ever came back. I know where he stores it. How could you possibly know that? Because 5 years ago, before the accident, you told me Marcus had a safe in his home office. You mentioned it once when you were upset with him about something. Said he kept all his secrets there. You were worried he was involved in something unethical at the hospital. Sophia leaned forward. If we can get into that safe, we can prove what he did. We can expose him, and maybe, just maybe, you can start to reclaim what was taken from you. 1355, Daniel stood and paced the small exam room. Every instinct he'd honed over years of medical training screamed that he should call security, then the police. Turn this entire situation over to authorities and let them sort truth from fiction. But another instinct, quieter but more insistent, whispered that Sophia was telling the truth. That his carefully ordered life was built on a foundation of lies. Even if I wanted to help you, he said slowly, Marcus's house has security. Cameras, alarms, probably guards. We can't just walk in and crack a safe. No. Sophia agreed, but you can. You're his brother. You have access, codes, trust. He won't suspect you. You're asking me to betray my family. I'm asking you to uncover the truth about what your family did to both of us. Sophia slid off the examination table, steadying herself against the edge. I understand if you don't believe me. I understand if you'd rather preserve the life you know than risk discovering it was never real. But Daniel, somewhere inside you, in whatever part of your brain still holds those lost memories, you know I'm telling the truth. You feel it, and God help him. He did, standing in this clinic at midnight with a wounded stranger who knew things about him no stranger should know. Daniel felt something stir in the blank space where 18 months of his life should have been. Not memories, exactly, but the ghost of them. The sense that something vital had been carved away. If I do this, he said carefully, if I help you get into Marcus's safe and we find nothing, you need to leave. Disappear again. And this time, stay gone. And if we find what I know we'll find, Sophia asked, then we go to the authorities together. No more running. Daniel held out his hand. Do we have an agreement? Sophia took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd been bleeding out minutes ago. We have an agreement. Thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to rattle the windows. Daniel thought about the brother he'd trusted with his recovery, with his life. Thought about the empty spaces in his memory where a wife and an unborn child might have existed. Thought about the bracelet still clutched in his other hand, bearing an inscription in his own handwriting. We'll need to move fast, he said, releasing Sophia's hand and moving into surgeon mode. Marcus is hosting a medical charity gala tomorrow night. He mentioned it last week, complaining about the preparation. The house will be empty except for catering stuff. And they'll be focused on the event spaces, not his private office. You've already decided to help me, Sophia observed, something like relief flooding her features. I've decided to find the truth, Daniel corrected, whatever that turns out to be. He cleaned up the examination room, disposing of bloody gauze and instruments, working in silence, while Sophia watched. When he finished, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to Marcus. Asterisk, can't make the gala tomorrow. Emergency surgery got called in. Sorry. Asterisk, the response came within seconds. Asterisk, no problem. We'll catch up next week. Asterisk, he sounds friendly, Sophia noted, reading over Daniel's shoulder. Marcus always sounds friendly, Daniel said. That's what makes him effective. He drove Sophia to a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash for the room under a false name. The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine. In the parking lot, with rain still falling and dawn still hours away, Daniel handed Safine a prepaid phone. "Stay here tomorrow," he instructed. "Don't go out. Don't call anyone. I'll text you when I have something." "Daniel," Sophia said as he turned to leave. "Thank you for believing me, or at least for being willing to consider that I might be telling the truth." "I'm a surgeon," Daniel replied. "I've been trained to examine evidence and make judgments based on data, not emotion. Right now, the data suggests you deserve a proper investigation." He paused, then added, "But Sophia, if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of elaborate con, I will make sure you regret it." "I know," she said simply, "but I'm not lying." Daniel drove back to his penthouse as the sky began to lighten, exhaustion pulling at his bones. He showered, changed, tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't settle. He kept seeing Sophia's storm gray eyes, kept feeling the weight of the bracelet he'd slipped into his pocket, kept hearing her voice. "Asterisk, you promised you'd wait for me." Daniel. Asterisk, had he made that promise? In the hours or days before an accident that stole his memories, had he looked at this woman and sworn to wait for her, no matter how long it took? The possibility felt more real than it should have. He spent the day maintaining normalcy, seeing patients, reviewing surgical schedules, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues, all while his phone sat heavy in his pocket, counting down hours until sunset and the gala that would empty Marcus's house. At 6 p.m., Daniel left the hospital and drove to his brother's estate in the hills overlooking the city. The house was massive, all glass and steel, and modern architecture, a monument to Marcus's success as the chief administrator of 3 major hospitals. Daniel had been here dozens of times, but had never noticed how cold it felt. He parked down the street and waited, watching catering vans arrive and depart, seeing lights blaze in the main rooms while other sections remained dark. At 7:30, the house seemed to settle into its event rhythm. Daniel used his key to enter through the back door, the security system accepting his code without complaint. Marcus had given him access years ago. Casual trust between brothers. The office was on the 2nd floor, a masculine space of dark wood and leather that smelled faintly of expensive cigars. Daniel closed the door behind him and stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. A part of him still hoped he'd find nothing, that this entire situation was some misunderstanding that would resolve with laughter and relief. But another part, growing stronger by the moment, knew better. The safe was behind a painting of a shipwreck, because Marcus had never been subtle about his metaphors. Daniel pulled the painting aside and stared at the biometric lock. Fingerprint and retinal scan. His earlier confidence wavered. He couldn't bypass that kind of security without leaving obvious evidence. Then he remembered Marcus's emergency bypass. Every high-security system had one, usually a code that allowed access if the biometric systems failed. Marcus had mentioned it once, complaining about having to memorize another set of numbers. Asterisk's mother's birthday plus the year we bought this house, asterisk, he'd said. Asterisk, as if I could ever forget those dates. Asterisk, Daniel entered the numbers slowly. The safe clicked open. Inside were files, dozens of them, meticulously organized and labeled. Daniel pulled them out with shaking hands, spreading them across Marcus's desk. What he found made his blood run cold. Medical reports falsified to exaggerate Daniel's mental instability after the accident. Consent forms for increased medication that Daniel had never signed. His brother's forgery precise and practiced. Communications with hospital administrators to limit Sophia's access, describing her as a dangerous obsessive rather than a legitimate spouse. Copies of the marriage certificate Marcus had somehow obtained and hid it. Bank records showing the trust fund had been accessed and drained, with transfers routed through shell companies Marcus controlled. Legal documents prepared to have the marriage annulled on grounds of Daniel's mental incapacity at the time of the ceremony. And photographs. Surveillance photos of Sophia over the past 5 years, tracking her movements from city to city, job to job. Recent images showing her apartment building, her car, even the park where she ate lunch. Marcus hadn't just kept them apart. He'd been watching her, monitoring her, waiting for her to make a move toward the money or toward Daniel himself. The final file made Daniel's stomach turn. A contract with a private security firm dated 1 week ago. Services rendered included asset retrieval and target deterrence. The description matched Sophia's story about being run off the road. Marcus had tried to kill her. Daniel pulled out his phone with numb fingers and photographed every document, every page, building a digital case against his brother. When he finished, he carefully returned the files to the safe, leaving everything as he'd found it. Marcus couldn't know yet. Not until they'd secured this evidence properly, made it impossible to destroy. He was closing the safe when footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Daniel froze, his heart hammering. The doorknob turned. "Daniel," Marcus's voice, surprised but not angry. "What are you doing here? I thought you had emergency surgery." Daniel's mind raced. He turned slowly, schooling his features into casual confusion. It got rescheduled. Patient stabilized. "I thought I'd stop by, grab those conference papers you wanted me to review." Marcus stepped fully into the office, and in the low light from the desk lamp, Daniel saw his brother clearly, for perhaps the first time in 5 years. The slight tension around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost This wasn't surprise. This was calculation. "The papers are in my study downstairs," Marcus said carefully. "This is my private office. I don't keep work files here. Right? I forgot." Daniel moved toward the door, keeping his body language relaxed, despite the adrenaline screaming through his system. "I'll just go. You opened the safe. Not a question." Marcus's eyes had found the painting, not quite flush against the wall, where Daniel had hastily replaced it. "Why would you open my personal safe, little brother?" The endearment sounded like a threat. Daniel made a split-second decision. Running would confirm guilt. "Better to bluff. I was looking for those papers. You mentioned the code once, said I could access anything I needed. Was I wrong?" "No," Marcus said slowly, moving to the desk. "You weren't wrong. I did tell you that years ago, before your accident, when I actually trusted you completely." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Marcus settled into his desk chair with the ease of someone in control, "that I've been waiting for something like this to happen. Waiting for you to start asking questions, digging into things better left alone. Tell me, what prompted this sudden curiosity? Or should I say who?" Daniel felt ice slide down his spine. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sophia Bennett," Marcus said, and the name hung between them like a weapon. "She found you, didn't she? Showed up with her convenient proof and tragic story. I wondered how long it would take after she got her hands on those trust documents. There was no point in lying anymore." "You've been watching her. Protecting you," Marcus corrected. "From a woman who would have destroyed everything you've built." "Everything we've built. You are finally moving past that accident. Daniel, your career was flourishing. You were focused, successful, free of distractions. Then she came along and poisoned you with fantasies of a relationship that would have ruined us both. We were married." Daniel's voice was flat, controlled. "She was my wife, and you erased her from my life." "I saved your life," Marcus shot back, rising from his chair. "Do you know what you were like before the accident? Distracted, moody, making ridiculous plans to leave surgery and open a free clinic in some poverty-stricken neighborhood. You were throwing away millions in potential earnings, damaging our family's reputation. All for a woman who had nothing to offer you but misguided idealism. She was pregnant with my child." The words dropped like stones. Marcus's expression flickered, genuine surprise breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "She told you that? She miscarried 4 weeks after you drove her away," Daniel continued, something dangerous building in his chest. "While I was recovering in blissful ignorance, thinking you were helping me heal. She was alone in an emergency room losing our baby. That's unfortunate. Marcus said after a moment, and the clinical detachment in his voice made Daniel want to hit him, but it changes nothing. The relationship was toxic. Your judgment was compromised. I did what was necessary to protect your future, by stealing her trust fund, by falsifying medical records, by trying to have her killed. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable at that last accusation. The security firm was meant to discourage her, not harm her. A few close calls to remind her that pursuing this path was dangerous. I never authorized anything that would cause serious injury. How generous of you. Daniel pulled out his phone, fingers steady despite his rage. I photographed everything in your safe. Marcus, every document, every piece of evidence of what you've done. It's already backed up to 3 different cloud services. If anything happens to me or to Sophia, it goes to the police, the medical board, and every news outlet in the state. His brother's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Daniel pulled up one of the photos, turning the screen so Marcus could see the clearly legible falsified consent form. Do you really want to test that theory? A long silence stretched between them. Through the windows, Daniel could hear the murmur of the gala below, wealthy donors discussing charitable giving over champagne, completely unaware of the drama unfolding above them. What do you want? Marcus finally asked, and Daniel heard the defeat in his voice. The truth, all of it. Every detail you've kept from me for 5 years. And then you're going to help me make this right. Marcus laughed, hollow and bitter. Make it right. Daniel, you can't undo 5 years of history. The damage is done. Even if you recover some memories, even if you rebuild something with Sophia, it will never be what it was. I didn't just erase her from your life. I erased the person you were when you loved her. The words cut deeper than Daniel expected, perhaps because they were true. Even if he remembered everything, 5 years had passed. 5 years of separate lives, separate grief, separate growth. Could they ever truly reconnect? Could he ever be the man who had made promises to Sophia and meant them with his whole heart? Maybe not, Daniel admitted. But I deserve the chance to try. And more importantly, Sophia deserves the truth and the apology she never got. Whatever happens after that is between her and me. Marcus moved to the window, his back to Daniel, shoulders slumped in a way that made him look older than his 40 years. Father would have done the same thing, he said quietly. He built his family on practical decisions, not sentimental ones. I learned from the best. Father was wrong. The realization felt like freedom. And so are you. Success built on lies and manipulation isn't success, Marcus. It's just a prettier version of failure. Daniel headed for the door, then paused. I'm giving you 24 hours to turn yourself into the authorities. Confess to the fraud, the embezzlement, the harassment. If you don't, I'll do it for you, and I won't be gentle about it. You'll destroy everything, Marcus said, still not turning around. Our reputation, your career, the family name, all for a woman you don't even remember loving. No, Daniel corrected. You destroyed it the moment you chose to prioritize reputation over humanity. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. He left Marcus standing in the dark office and walked through the gala on his way out, anonymous in his casual clothes among the tuxedos and evening gowns. No one noticed him leave. No one ever really noticed him, he realized. He'd spent 5 years being the person Marcus wanted him to be, invisible in his competence and dedication. At the motel, Sophia answered his knock with guarded hope in her eyes. Did you find anything? Everything, Daniel said, stepping inside and closing the door. You were telling the truth. All of it, Marcus admitted it. Sophia's legs seemed to give out. She sat heavily on the bed, hands shaking. I've spent 5 years wondering if I was crazy, if I'd imagined our connection. Therapy, Daniel. Years of therapy trying to reconcile the man I knew with the man who could forget me so completely. And all this time, it was your brother. Daniel sat beside her, carefully maintaining space between them. She was still a stranger to him. Whatever their past connection, I'm sorry, Sophia, for not fighting harder to remember, for not questioning the gaps in my memory more thoroughly, for every moment you suffered because I was too comfortable in my ignorance. It wasn't your fault." Sophia wiped her eyes. "Marcus exploited your vulnerability. He betrayed both of us. He has 24 hours to turn himself in," Daniel said. "After that, I'm taking everything to the police. They'll want to interview you. Get your statement. This could get ugly." "I don't care about ugly anymore," Sophia said with surprising fierceness. "I care about justice. For us. For our baby. For every moment we lost because your brother decided his version of your life was more important than your actual choices." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelations settling around them. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice hesitant. "There's something else I need to show you. Something I've been carrying for 5 years, waiting for this moment." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather journal, worn at the edges from repeated handling. "You kept a diary during our time together." "Not regularly, just occasional entries when something important happened. You gave it to me the week before your accident. Said you wanted me to have it in case anything ever happened to you. I think part of you knew Marcus was planning something, even if you couldn't articulate it." Daniel took the journal carefully, as though it might disintegrate in his hands. The leather was soft, familiar somehow. He opened to a random page and saw his own handwriting, younger and less controlled than his current precise surgical script. "Read it," Sophia urged gently. "Maybe it will help you remember. Or at least help you understand who you were." Daniel turned to the first entry, dated 2 years before his accident. "Asterisk met someone today who made me laugh at myself. Actually laugh. Not the polite chuckle I use at hospital functions. Her name is Sophia, and she serves terrible coffee with a smile that makes it taste better." Asterisk 32 to 48. He flipped through pages, watching his own past unfold in fragments. Descriptions of their first date, a disaster involving rain and a broken umbrella. Arguments about his working hours and her insistence that he remember he was human, not just a surgeon. The entry where he'd written, asterisk, told Sophia, "I loved her today." She cried, "So did I never knew 3 words could feel so terrifying and so right at the same time." Asterisk further in, an entry that made his breath catch. Asterisk, bought a ring. Marcus saw it and lost his mind. Said I was throwing away my future on a woman who would never fit into our world. Maybe he's right. Maybe she'd never fit into the world he built for me. But maybe I don't want that world anymore. Asterisk, I've fought with him, Daniel said, looking up at Sophia. About you. About us. It's documented here. Multiple entries about arguments with Marcus. You stood up to him? Sophia confirmed. It terrified me because I knew how much you valued his opinion, but you kept choosing me anyway. Daniel continued reading, his hands beginning to shake. Asterisk, Sophia's pregnant. Found out today. I've never been so scared in my life. What if I'm like my father? What if I fail her the way he failed my mother? But Sophia just held my hands and said fear meant I cared, and caring meant I'd try. We're going to do this together. Asterisk tears blurred his vision. He could see the words, but couldn't connect them to actual memories, and the frustration of it made him want to scream. This life, documented in his own handwriting, felt like a story about someone else. Someone braver, more open, more willing to risk everything for love. I can't remember, he said, his voice breaking. Sophia, I'm reading about my own life, and I can't remember any of it. The emotions, the moments, they're just words on a page. I know. Sophia moved closer, not touching him, but offering presence. But Daniel, memories aren't just what we recall. They're also what we choose to become. You don't have to remember loving me to decide you want justice for what was done to both of us. She was right, and the clarity of it steadied him. Whether he recovered these memories or not, the facts remained unchanged. He had been wronged. Sophia had been wronged. Their unborn child had been lost because of Marcus's manipulation. That was enough reason to act. Tomorrow, Daniel said, closing the journal carefully. I'm going to visit my neurologist, Dr. Patricia Webb. She treated me after the accident. If Mark has falsified records and medications, she needs to know. She might also be able to help with memory recovery techniques. Do you think the memories can come back? Sophia asked, hope and fear mingling in her expression. I don't know, Daniel admitted. Retrograde amnesia is unpredictable. Sometimes memories resurface spontaneously, sometimes through therapy, sometimes never. But Dr. Webb is ethical and thorough. If there's a chance, she explore it. That night, Daniel returned to his penthouse, but couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, reading the journal cover to cover, trying to recognize himself in the man who had written these entries. Around 3 a.m., something in his mind shifted. Not a memory, exactly, but a sensation. He was standing in his kitchen, and suddenly he could smell coffee. Not the expensive blend he currently bought, but cheap diner coffee. He could hear laughter, feminine and bright, coming from somewhere just out of reach. His hands shook as he gripped the journal tighter. Was this the beginning of recall? Or just his mind creating false memories based on what he'd read? He couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was agonizing. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Dr. Webb's office without an appointment. Her receptionist tried to turn him away, but Patricia herself emerged from her consulting room, took one look at his face, and ushered him inside immediately. Daniel, what's wrong? You look like you haven't slept in days. He told her everything. Sophia's appearance, the journal, Marcus's confession, the files documenting years of medical fraud. Patricia listened, without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and went to her filing cabinets, pulling out a thick folder. I need to show you something. I've kept duplicate records of all my patients for years, stored separately from hospital files. It's a habit from early in my career when I discovered administrative errors that nearly killed someone. She spread documents across her desk. These are your actual treatment records from after the accident. And these, she pulled out another set, are the records currently in the hospital system. They don't match. Daniel compared them side by side. The hospital records showed prescriptions for heavy sedatives and anti-anxiety medications he'd never actually been given. Notations about confusion and disorientation that didn't appear in Patricia's files. Recommendations for isolation from potentially triggering visitors. Marcus submitted these. Danielle asked, though he already knew the answer. He presented them as updates from specialists you were seeing. Patricia said, anger tightening her voice. I questioned some of the medications at the time. They seemed excessive for your condition. But Marcus assured me they came from a neuropsychiatrist at Johns Hopkins. He even provided documentation that I now realize was forged. Why did you keep duplicate records, if you believe the updates? Patricia met his eyes. Because something felt wrong. I couldn't articulate it, but my instinct said this didn't match the patient I'd been treating. So I kept my original observations separate, just in case. 38 minutes and 43 seconds. Can you help me recover my memories? Daniel asked. Is there any technique? Any therapy that might work? Possibly, Patricia said carefully. Retrograde amnesia caused by trauma sometimes responds to contextual memory therapy. We recreate environments and situations from the lost period, hoping to trigger neural pathways that still exist, but have become inaccessible. However, she paused. I need to be honest with you, Daniel. After 5 years, the probability of full recovery is low. Some fragments might return, but expecting to remember everything would be setting yourself up for disappointment. I understand, Daniel said, but I have to try. For Sophia, for the person I apparently was, I have to try. Patricia nodded. Then we start immediately. I'll need to meet with Sophia, get detailed information about your life together, places you frequented, music you listened to, specific conversations. We'll construct a therapeutic timeline and work through it systematically. Over the next week, Daniel's carefully controlled life unraveled completely. Marcus was arrested after Daniel and Sophia went to the police with their evidence. The investigation expanded to include hospital fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Daniel found himself at the center of a scandal he'd never wanted. He took a leave of absence from the hospital, unable to focus on surgery while his world imploded. Instead, he spent hours each day with Patricia and Sophia, working through memory exercises that left him exhausted and frustrated. They visited the apartment he'd shared with Sophia, now occupied by strangers, but structurally unchanged. They went to the coffee shop where they'd met, sat in the same booth, ordered the same terrible coffee. Nothing sparked recognition. Daniel could see the places, hear the stories, but they remained external to him, like watching someone else's home movies. "I'm failing," he told Patricia after a particularly frustrating session. "Every technique we try, nothing works. The memories are just gone." "Or," Patricia suggested gently, "they're transformed into something else." "Danielle, memories aren't video recordings we can replay. They're reconstructions, influenced by emotion and context and time. Maybe instead of trying to remember the exact past, you should focus on understanding who you were and deciding who you want to be now." The advice frustrated him because it felt like giving up. But that night, lying in his penthouse with Sophia's journal open beside him, Daniel realized Patricia might be right. He'd been so focused on recovering what was lost that he hadn't considered what he might build instead. He called Sophia, who was staying temporarily with a friend while the legal proceedings unfolded. "Can we talk in person?" They met at a park near the river, neutral territory that held no memories for either of them. Sophia looked tired, but stronger than when he'd first seen her bleeding on his clinic doorstep. The legal vindication had given her something back, some sense of agency the trauma had stolen. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, "about expectations. Yours, mine. What's realistic versus what's fantasy?" Sophia tensed. "You're gonna tell me this was a mistake, that even with justice served, we can't recapture what we had?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm going to tell you that you're right. We can't recapture it. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe what we had 5 years ago was beautiful and real and worth fighting for. But we're different people now, shaped by different experiences. I don't remember loving you, Sophia, but I remember reading about loving you. And the man who wrote those journal entries, he sounds like someone I'd like to be again." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying let's start over. Not as strangers. Exactly, because we have too much history for that. But as two people who've survived something terrible and are trying to figure out what comes next, I can't promise I'll ever remember our past. But I can promise I'll honor it by trying to build a future that man would have wanted." "A future together?" Sophia asked carefully. "If you want that," Daniel said. "I know it's not the same as what we had. I know I'm not the same person you fell in love with. But maybe we could discover if there's something worth building between who we are now." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow past. "I spent 5 years mourning you while you were still alive," she finally said, "grieving for a relationship that existed but that no one else acknowledged. It nearly destroyed me. Daniel, I'm not sure I can risk that kind of pain again." "I understand," Daniel said, "and I won't pressure you. But Sophia, if there's even a small part of you that wants to try, I promise I'll spend every day earning your trust. Not trying to be who I was, but trying to be someone worthy of what we might become." The words hung between them, fragile and tentative. Sophia reached out slowly and took his hand, the same hand that had worn a wedding ring he couldn't remember placing there. "One day at a time," she said. "No expectations, no pressure. We get to know each other again from the beginning, and we see what develops naturally. Can you live with that uncertainty?" "I've been living with uncertainty for 5 years," Daniel replied, squeezing her hand gently. "At least now I know what I'm uncertain about." They started simply. Coffee dates at neutral locations. Walks in parks, conversations about current events and future hopes rather than past regrets. Daniel learned about the woman Sophia had become in their years apart, the resilience she'd developed, the career and social work she'd built while moving from city to city. She learned about the surgeon he'd become, dedicated but isolated, successful but lonely. 6 weeks after Marcus's arrest, Daniel had his first genuine flash of recovered memory. He and Sophia were cooking dinner in his penthouse, an experiment in domesticity that had become a weekly ritual. She was chopping vegetables, telling a story about a difficult client, when she laughed at her own joke. The sound, that specific pitch and rhythm, unlocked something. Suddenly he was in a different kitchen, smaller and more cluttered. Sophia was laughing at something he'd said, her hair shorter, her face younger. She was wearing an oversized shirt, his shirt, and nothing else. He'd been trying to flip a pancake and had launched it directly at the ceiling where it stuck, defying gravity. The memory lasted only seconds, but was absolutely crystalline clear. Daniel, Sophia's voice pulled him back. "You okay?" You went completely still. "I remembered something," he said, his voice shaking. "Not the whole context, but a moment. You in a kitchen, laughing at my terrible pancake skills." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. "Our apartment. That was the morning after you'd proposed. You wanted to make me breakfast in bed, but you'd never actually cooked breakfast before." The pancake ended up on the ceiling and stayed there for 3 days because we kept forgetting to clean it. Off 46 to 28, Daniel sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the significance of that single recovered memory. It wasn't much, just a flash of domesticity and joy, but it was real. His memory. Not something he'd read in the journal or been told about. Something he'd actually experienced and, against all odds, retrieved. "Is it coming back?" Sophia asked, hope and fear mixing in her voice. "Are you remembering more?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "It was just that one moment, triggered by your laugh. I can't force anything else." But over the following weeks, more fragments surfaced. A conversation about his mother, sitting on a fire escape under stars, the feeling of Sophia's hand in his during a movie neither of them watched, the weight of fear and joy when she'd told him about the pregnancy. Never complete narratives, just sensory flashes that confirmed what the journal had documented. Patricia explained it during one of their sessions. "Your brain is reactivating dormant neural pathways. The memories were never completely erased, just made inaccessible by the trauma. As you build new positive associations with Sophia, your mind is beginning to reconnect old pathways with new experiences." "Will he remember everything eventually?" Sophia asked. "Impossible to say," Patricia replied honestly. "Some patients recover significant portions of lost memories. Others only ever retrieve fragments. What matters is that Daniel is experiencing genuine recall, not false memories constructed from stories. That's medically remarkable." After 5 years, Marcus's trial began 4 months after his arrest. Daniel testified about the falsified records, the stolen trust fund, the systematic isolation from Sophia. The prosecution built a devastating case of medical fraud, financial manipulation, and conspiracy. Throughout it all, Marcus maintained a cold dignity, never apologizing, never showing remorse. On the day of sentencing, Daniel sat beside Sophia in the courtroom gallery. Marcus received 8 years for fraud and embezzlement, with additional civil penalties that would bankrupt him. As the bailiffs led him away, Marcus looked directly at Daniel for the first time since the trial began. The expression on his brother's face wasn't anger or hatred. It was something worse. Disappointment, as though Daniel had failed some fundamental test by choosing justice over family loyalty. The look said more clearly than words ever could that Marcus still believed he'd been right, that protecting the family name justified any action. "Do you regret it?" Sophia asked quietly as they left the courthouse. "Turning in your own brother every day," Daniel admitted. "But I'd do it again anyway. Some things are more important than family, like truth, like justice, like not letting fear and manipulation define our lives." That evening, Sitting on the balcony of his penthouse with Sophia beside him, Daniel felt something shift inside himself. Not a recovered memory this time, but something deeper. A sense of rightness, of being precisely where he needed to be. "I've been thinking about the free clinic," he said suddenly. Sophia looked at him curiously. "What free clinic?" "The one I apparently wanted to open before the accident. It's in the journal. Mentioned in several entries. A clinic for people who can't afford regular medical care." Marcus hated the idea. Said it was financial suicide and beneath my skills. Daniel turned to face her fully. "I want to do it. I want to open that clinic and make it real." Sophia's eyes widened. "Daniel, that's a massive undertaking. The costs alone." "I know," he interrupted. "But I've been successful. Sophia, I've accumulated more money than I need. More than I'll ever need. The trust fund Marcus stole from you, I've recovered it and tripled it through investments. We could use that as seed money, combine it with charitable grants and donations. It would work," Sophia repeated softly. "If you want to be part of it," Daniel said. "You're a social worker. You understand the community needs better than I ever could. We could build something meaningful together, something that helps people who fall through the cracks of the healthcare system." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable in the fading light. Then she smiled. Not the careful, guarded expression she'd worn for months, but something open and genuine. "The man I fell in love with 5 years ago. He wanted to change the world one patient at a time. He drove Marcus crazy with his idealism and his refusal to see medicine as purely business. I've been wondering if that man was gone forever." "Maybe he was," Daniel said. "Maybe I can't ever fully be who I was, but I can choose to honor his dreams, to build the life he wanted, even if I can't remember wanting it myself." "That's not true," Sophia said gently. "Daniel, you do want this. I can see it in your eyes when you talk about the clinic. It's not a memory telling you this matters. It's you, right now, recognizing what's important. Maybe that's not recovery. Maybe that's just growth." 9 months after Sophia had collapsed bleeding on his doorstep, Daniel stood in front of a converted warehouse in the city's east side. The sign above the door read Riverside Community Clinic, free medical care for all. Inside, a staff of volunteer doctors and nurses prepared for their opening day. Sophia stood beside him, her hand in his, wearing the medical ID bracelet he'd once given her and she'd recently begun wearing again. It wasn't the same as a wedding ring. Not yet, but it was a symbol of connection, of possibility. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. "This could fail spectacularly. We could run out of funding, face legal challenges, administrative nightmares. Every practical part of my brain is screaming that this is a mistake. And the impractical part," Sophia prompted. "The impractical part," Daniel said. "The part that apparently fell in love with a coffee shop waitress and proposed under the stars and wanted to change the world. That part knows this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing." The first patient arrived 20 minutes later, an elderly man with untreated diabetes and no insurance. Daniel examined him carefully, prescribed medication the clinic would provide for free, and scheduled follow-up appointments. It was routine work, nothing technically challenging, but Daniel felt more fulfilled than he had performing complex neuro. By the end of the first week, they'd seen over 200 patients. The local news picked up the story. Human interest pieces about the prominent surgeon who'd left private practice to serve the underserved. Donations began arriving, enough to sustain operations and expand services. One evening, 3 months after the clinic opened, Daniel was finishing paperwork when Sophia entered his office. She looked nervous, clutching something small in her hands. "Can we talk?" she asked. 54 minutes and 8 seconds, of course. Daniel put down his pen, giving her his full attention. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Sophia said quickly. "Actually, something might be very right, but I'm scared to hope, and I need to tell you before I lose my courage." She took a deep breath. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Daniel stared at her, processing words that carried impossible weight. Pregnant, he repeated. 10 weeks, Sophia confirmed. I found out this morning. I know we haven't talked about this. I know we're still figuring things out. I know our relationship is still new, even if it's all so old. And Daniel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, cutting off her anxious rambling. Sophia, this is... He couldn't find words adequate to what he felt. Terror and joy in equal measure. The same combination he'd apparently felt 5 years ago when she'd told him the first time. Are you okay with this? Sophia asked against his shoulder. Because I know it's complicated. I know there's no guarantee this pregnancy will be easier than the last one. And I understand if you need time to. I love you, Daniel said, the words emerging with complete certainty. I don't remember falling in love with you 5 years ago, but I know I'm in love with you now. With who you are, who we are together, what we're building, a baby, our baby. That's not a complication. That's a miracle. Sophia pulled back to look at his face, searching for doubt and finding none. You really mean that? I really mean that, Daniel confirmed. And Sophia, I want to marry you. Again, or for the first time, from my perspective, whichever way you want to think about it. I want us to be a family, officially and completely. Tears streamed down Sophia's face. Are you proposing? Badly, Daniel admitted. I don't have a ring. We're in a clinic office surrounded by patient files, and I'm probably supposed to get down on one knee. But yes, I'm proposing. Will you marry me? Yes, Sophia said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, absolutely, yes. They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the park, where they'd agreed to start over. Dr. Patricia Webb officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. The guest list was small, close friends and colleagues who'd supported them through the chaos of the past year. Caroline, Daniel's sister, attended despite the family scandal. She approached him before the ceremony began, her expression uncertain. I know I don't have the right to be here, she said quietly. After everything Marcus did, after the family's role in keeping you apart. You're my sister. Daniel interrupted gently. You didn't know what Marcus was doing. None of that is your fault. I should have questioned things more, Carolyn insisted. Should have wondered why you never talked about your recovery. Why there were gaps in your memory you never explored. I was too comfortable accepting the easy narrative. We all were, Daniel said. But you're here now. That matters. As Daniel watched Sophia walk toward him in a simple white dress, her hand resting protectively on the slight swell of a belly, he felt another memory surface. Not visual this time, but emotional. The overwhelming certainty that this woman was his future, had always been his future, would always be his future. Maybe he'd felt it 5 years ago, when he'd proposed the first time. Maybe he was feeling it freshly in this moment. It didn't matter anymore. The past and present wove together into something new, something that belonged entirely to them. After the ceremony, as they stood together, accepting congratulations, Sophia leaned close and whispered, Any regrets about any of this? Daniel looked around at the life they'd built from ruins. The clinic serving people who had nowhere else to turn. The baby growing inside her. The simple gold band now on his finger. The woman beside him who'd survived 5 years of grief and emerged stronger. Not a single one, he said honestly. That night, in the apartment they now shared, smaller than his penthouse, but infinitely warmer, Daniel opened the leather journal one final time. He turned to the last page where his younger self had written final words before the accident that had changed everything. Asterisk, if something happens to me, if I forget, if I lose everything I've built with Sophia, I want to leave this note for my future self. You love her. Not because she's perfect, not because loving her is easy, but because she makes you remember that being human is more important than being successful. Fight for her. Fight for the life you dreamed of together. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, convince you that the safe path is the right path. Some promises are worth keeping, even when you can't remember making them. Asterisk. Daniel closed the journal and set it on the shelf beside their bed. He didn't need it anymore. The past, whether remembered or not, had led him here. And here, against all odds, was exactly where he belonged. Sophia stirred beside him, half asleep. "Come to bed," she murmured. "Our daughter is already complaining about your restlessness." "Daughter," Daniel smiled, sliding under the covers beside her. "We don't know that yet." "I know," Sophia said with comfortable certainty, resting her head on his chest. "The same way I knew you'd find your way back to me eventually." "Some things you just know." Daniel wrapped his arms around her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, the new life growing between them, the weight of a promise kept even through amnesia and betrayal and 5 years of separation. The storm that had brought them together was long past. What remained was morning, clear and full of possibility. Te aga iengi.